So you've decided to play Elite Engineering. When you join the game, it's going to show you this menu. This is the parts menu. You can press 1 to get rid of it. This is your plot in your garage. You can press Q to run, E to fly, Q and E to fly really fast. These arrows notate the center of your plot, and then we have forward indicating arrows on both ends. Before we start building, I'll go over the tools that we have. There are 9 of them. You can use each of them by pressing the number keys 1 through 9. You can press 1 to open the parts tool, and we're going to place a block here just for an example. 2 is the move tool. You can use it to select a part and then grab any of these circles here to move it in whatever direction you'd like. You can also enter in the coordinates at the bottom. This is at the center of the plot and 10 studs up. If you have a part selected with the move tool, you can click and drag with it to move it around freehand with your mouse. And while you're doing that, you can also press R, T, and Y to rotate parts differently. 3 is your rotate tool. Click on a part and you can rotate along any of the axes here. There are 3 modes for rotation. I wouldn't worry about these for now. 4 is your scale tool. You can use it to stretch parts. You can also Control Z to undo and Control Y to redo and X to delete. Those are the main tools you're going to be using to move parts and manipulate them. If you notice that you need to move a part more precisely than it is, you can go into the bottom right and set an increment. I already have mine set to 0.1, but if I set it lower here, you can see I can move this super precisely, or I can set it to something like 1 if I want to move it exactly 1 stud in whatever direction. Same thing with angle, applies to the rotate tool. Currently I have it set to only rotate 1 degree at a time. You can also do something like 45 if that's more convenient for you. And then there's also a secondary, so you can have 2 sets of increments. These are the ones that I use. Other people use others. This is up to preference. Also important while we're down here in the bottom right is mirror mode. You can turn on X or Z. This means that any parts you place are going to be on both sides. Also, if you move anything, it's going to apply to both sides as well. If you're thinking about making anything symmetrical, make sure you have mirror mode on first. If you have something in mirror mode that is not mirrored and you want to mirror it to the other side, you can select it by clicking on it with any of the tools and pressing Shift M. You can press M to switch between the different mirror modes, and you can also press N to switch between your different increments. If you have a part selected, you can Shift C to copy it and Shift V to paste it, or you can Shift D to duplicate. And then continuing to move on through our tools, if you press 5, we have the paint tool. This you can set whether or not a block has collision. So if I turn collision off, I can walk and jump straight through it. Turn collision back on. You can also change the material. This essentially changes the texture. You can also click and hold on any of these to edit them if you want a custom color, or you can do the eyedropper tool on a part and it'll select that color. 6 is the config tool. This allows you to change the properties of a block. You can set the density, which is essentially the weight of the part. Elasticity is the bounciness, and friction is of course the friction. I wouldn't worry about elasticity weight or friction weight for now. 7 is the weld tool. I would recommend that you do not use the weld tool. There's no reason you should worry about it, and there's not really any use for it unless you're building something that is significantly larger than the garage area. And if you're a beginner player, you're probably not. So I wouldn't worry about it. I may go over it in a later video though. 8 is your logic tool. You may notice that parts become transparent in this mode. And if I place down any of the logic blocks, for example, you can see that they have input and output nodes. 9 is the triangle tool. This is also kind of an advanced tool. I wouldn't really worry about it for now, but if you select 3 points, it will generate a triangle between them. I'd also encourage you to explore the settings in the bottom left. Here you can enable and disable PvP, switch between different gravity modes, open up different doors on your garage, like the roof, front door, back door. You can also go into customize garage and then go into settings to hide the walls completely. By default, you start with a white floor, which is pretty annoying, so you can turn on dark mode to have it dark like I do. You can click back to garage to go back to your garage at any point. You can go into keybinds. I would recommend that you explore this as well. So how does building actually work? When you start building, parts will weld if their hitboxes are touching. So for example, these two parts would not weld if I activate. You can see they're completely separate. Even if they touch like this, just barely, their hitboxes are next to each other, they will weld together and they're now one part. This also includes things like this. While the parts themselves are not actually intersecting, their hitboxes are, so these will weld. Something that trips a lot of people up is joints. All joints in the game have two sides like this. If you press 6 for the config tool and you click on either sides, you can see it has a top and a bottom. The bottom is going to have all of the configs for the joint. You can press Ctrl T, so I can see that this is a hinge and it will rotate along this axis. The way that joints work, when you activate, they will snap together and the joint will act in the center. So for example, this hinge, you can see if you are moving a part, you can hold C to snap it to the corners or center of a block. You can also use this while scaling if you'd like to snap to a certain face. Snapping is also useful for situations like this, where if I want to make these ends meet, I can snap like that. And now these are the exact same length. I can do the same for height as well. You can use C to snap with rotation as well, but it's a little bit different. If you hover over a corner or an edge or the center of a face, you can change the center of rotation. This is useful if we're making spokes or anything that needs to rotate around another part like this. So we can duplicate it, rotate it however we want, and now we have these perfectly rotated parts. The scale tool has two modes, normal and both. You can switch between these quickly by pressing enter. In normal mode, you will move one side at a time, and in both, it will move along both sides like this. For some parts, you'll notice two identical versions like the cylinder and cylinder S. The difference between these is that the cylinder is perfectly round while the cylinder S is not. Same thing applies to the sphere and mesh sphere. The sphere is perfectly round, the mesh sphere is not. The reason for this is that the regular cylinder uses a mathematically perfectly round hitbox, which is easy to calculate. Even though it doesn't look perfectly round, that is just the model of the block essentially. The cylinder S looks exactly the same, but you can actually stretch it. This is because it does not use a mathematical hitbox, it uses the hitbox of this mesh here. So all of these angles are actually the hitbox. So if I roll this, you'll notice it kind of bounces. And if I roll the regular cylinder, it's perfectly smooth. Same thing for the mesh sphere, it's a little bouncy, and the regular sphere, it's perfectly smooth. The regular cylinder and regular sphere are the only perfectly round objects in the game. Everything else, like the beveled cylinder, acts just like cylinder S or the mesh sphere. So this is actually not perfectly round. This is useful to know for things like wheels, where you can model the entire wheel, turn collision off for the whole thing, and then have a collision enabled transparent perfect cylinder over them to act as a hitbox. So you'll notice this wheel doesn't actually have collision, but the invisible cylinder does. If you'd like to load a template save, you can click Saves in the bottom left, go to Templates, there are a bunch here for you to choose from. You'll also notice a number out of 5,000 here. That is your part limit. Depending on where you're coming from, 5,000 parts may not sound like a lot, but personally I've been playing this game for well over a year and I have yet to hit the part limit. The main reason for the part limit is performance, because the game is multiplayer. Builds with a super high amount of parts tend to be very laggy, both for you and for others. There is talk though of increasing the part limit to 25,000 in private servers. And just to get an idea, here is a little office that I've made using only about 3,000 parts. Just to show you that you can still get plenty of detail within 5,000 parts. When it comes to saving your build, obviously you come down here to Saves. You can click on any of the available save slots, enter a name, a description if you want. Both are optional, and you can select Save to save it. You can also select a slot and click Load to load it. If you ever lose progress, the chances are you can actually revert it by going to Recovery. and these will have different recovery saves that you can open back up. And that's about everything you'll need to know to get started playing Elite Engineering. As I said earlier, I'll probably have to make a separate video going over logic, and I may make more videos going over more advanced building techniques, things like how to use the triangle tool, vectors, lists, etc. So stay tuned.